So now, if I were to unloop this, uncomment this, and I'm going to make this back to 50 because I want people to see it happening. We're going to play the game, and as we play the game, it's going to immediately start deleting these segments as we pass the corners. Every time we get past the corner, or 50 pixels away from our last corner, it's going to remove that segment.
So that makes sense because we're not just creating new segments, but we're also leaving old segments behind, which eats up memory. So
right. So here we are preventing ourselves from filling up memory with hallway segments which have long since served their purpose. All right, I'm kind of doing a rough job describing today. So let's put this back to 2 times the height of the screen. And let's make one more change. Let's make that first segment 1,000 pixels long. Where is it? One can't locate it. Why am I not locating it? Okay.
Yeah. Was that one?
There we go.
There we go.
As people will recall from our previous discussion, you want the first segment to be long so it's completely off the screen. Covers the entire width of the screen, and we're good to go. So 2 things we still need to do, which will go more quickly than this discussion. We need to add some particles, so we're similar in a sense to the game that we are making a clone of. And we need to do something as soon as we hit a wall, which is we want to restart the game. We'll approach our restart in a more robust fashion in later weeks, but right now we simply want to get the game running over and over to verify that the logic is all working. So let's go ahead and do the restart first and finish off with the particles. If you'll recall, the way this code has been set up is there's some initialization code in all of the different modules. So there's an init function generally. There is a start function, which is to say start the game actually playing. There's a stop function, which says, okay, we're done, stop playing. Don't let the player move anymore, don't make any more track segments, stop listening to the enter frame, etc., etc. And then we have a cleanup function, and its job is to go through and remove all of the game objects and to clean it up as if the game had never started. So as you might imagine, if we started the game and then 1 second after we started the game, we stopped it. 1 second after we stopped it, we did a cleanup, we would see something like this. So the game would start, and I didn't even have a chance to get to the end of the hallway before it had stopped and destroyed everything. And this is what we end up with. So to restart the game, using these mechanics, what we really want to do is, assuming that we've run into the wall and we have stopped the player, then we can simply stop the game, do a cleanup, reinitialize, which will rebuild all our layers, and then start the game over again. So we've added a function to game Lua, which, when called, will in one frame call the stop, in the next frame, or the next time after that, available after that, it will do a cleanup. The next time available after that will initialize, and then after some period of time, if we don't specify it, it'll be 1 second, 1,000 milliseconds, we'll restart the game. So to test this, before we hook it up to the game code, we can just go to main Lua, where we do an init at the beginning. 1 second later, we start. I'm going to make the wall segment shorter, too, so you can see this. Start with that short initial segment. We'll start after 1 second, and then half a second later, 500 milliseconds later, we'll call the restart function, and we will tell it, start the game again in 1.5 seconds. We do that, it starts 1 second, half a second later it restarts, and then it's done, because we didn't put it into a loop. So let's go ahead and comment that out. Over to the main, I'm sorry, go over to player.lua. And if you'll recall from last week, we had a collision function here on line 70 that basically, when we hit a wall or we hit anything, we called the player's stop function, which set the player's velocity to 0 and marked a flag is running, changed that to false, and then printed out a message. Let's see here. So what we want to do is, actually I got to step back here. Let's take a look back at game. One additional thing that I did here is you might recall from previous weeks where I said when you are developing an application or you're writing a game, you'll find yourself in a situation where you have one module that uses the contents of another module. So module A uses module B. But sometimes you'd like module B to be able to tell module A to do something. So you get into this kind of conundrum because module A can simply require module B and then call the functions directly through module B's handle. But you can't then in module B require module A because you'll create this loop where Lua is trying to include one file in another file, and then it gets there and says, oh, I need to go get that other file, and you create a loop. I'm waving at the screen like you can see me. So how do we solve this? What I encouraged people to do was to consider using custom events. So in a previous episode, I took and created 3 functions which are shortened names for existing functionality in Corona. So in Corona we have runtime add event listener, runtime remove event listener, and runtime dispatch event. I took those and I like to shorten them up a little bit, and I created 3 functions which do the same thing, call those functions, but they're called listen, ignore, and post, respectively. So listen is add event listener, ignore is remove event listener, and post is a renaming and a slight variation on how you would call dispatch. The reason I'm bringing this up is we have created within game a restart function. But if you remember, game requires the player module. So it's already grabbed the player module. So I couldn't just go into player module and say local game m equals require scripts game, because this would create a loop. Game would try to get player, player would try to get game, Lua would crash. At that point, it would give you an error message. So instead, because I want to use the restart function out of game, what I will do is after I have defined restart, at the bottom here, I will create a function called onRestart, and within there, all it does is call the restart function. And then using my shorthand notation, I will say listen for an event called onRestart, and when you get that event, call this function, which in turn calls restart and does what we want it to do. So subsequently, in player, type never fails to fail when you're trying to demonstrate something. Bear with me? Okay, that's because I changed the message. At this point, if I want to restart the game, all I've got to do is say everything else will work just as it did before. The player will collide with a wall. It will remove the listener for the collision. We don't need it anymore. It will stop the player, which sets the velocity for the player to 0, and sets the isRunning flag to false. Nothing else left there to do. And then I will post an onRestart event, which the game module is here listening for. It will catch that, and it will run public restart, which is it'll run the game module restart. Just to save this all. Restart it and let it hit the wall. So you can see here that it's hitting the wall, and as soon as it does, boom, it restarts the game, and then 1 second later it starts moving again.